I was sitting in my usual corner at the amber cup, hands resting flat on the same scarred wooden table I always chose, when she set the coffee down so slowly that I heard the porcelain touch the wood. Steam curled up between us, warm against the gray morning light coming through the window behind her. She didn't step back right away. She just stood there, watching me, waiting for something I couldn't name yet. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she asked, quiet and steady. My mouth opened before my mind caught up. "Wait, you're—" I never finished that sentence. I didn't need to. She already knew. "My name is Dean Wallace. I am 34 years old, and I live alone in Portland, Oregon, in a small house 2 blocks from the river, in a neighborhood where the rain has a way of making everything feel a little more honest than it looks anywhere else. I am an architect. I run a small firm with 1 partner and a handful of employees, and there are more coffee cups scattered across my desk at any given time than I would like to admit to a client. I was married once, to a woman named Melissa Cross, for 4 years. We divorced 1 year before the morning I just told you about. We never had children together, which made the ending simpler in some ways and lonelier in others. There was no custody schedule to argue over, no small voice asking why Daddy wasn't home for dinner anymore. There was just an empty half of a closet, a stack of mail that stopped arriving addressed to 2 names instead of 1, and a silence in the house that took months to stop noticing every time I walked through the front door. After the divorce, I built my life around small, repeatable things, because I found that structure helped more than any advice anyone gave me during that first hard year. Every morning, at exactly 8:15, I walked the 2 blocks from my house to a coffee shop called the Amber Cup, tucked between a used bookstore and a shuttered flower shop on a street that still had its old brick sidewalks, uneven in places from decades of frost and thaw. I ordered the same thing every time, black coffee, no sugar, and I sat at the same corner table by the window, where I could watch the street wake up without anyone expecting me to make conversation about it. It wasn't sad. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it can sound from the outside. It was simply mine. A person can build a good, quiet life out of habits, even after something in that life has broken. I had learned that the hard way, slowly, without anyone teaching me on purpose, and I wasn't in any hurry to unlearn it just because a year had passed. The Amber Cup itself was the kind of place that seemed to exist a little outside of ordinary time. The wood floors creaked in the same 3 spots no matter the season, and I had long since learned to step around them without thinking. The espresso machine hissed and sighed like it had opinions about the weather. There were old black and white photographs of the city on the walls, streets that didn't exist anymore, storefronts replaced twice over, and a chalkboard menu that someone rewrote every Monday morning in handwriting too careful and too pretty to be accidental. I liked that it never changed. After a year of change I hadn't asked for and couldn't control, sameness felt like a small, deliberate kindness the world was finally offering me, and I took it without questioning why I needed it so badly. It was maybe 8 months after the divorce that I noticed something different about my mornings. A new server had started working the early shift, the 7 o'clock to 8:30 window that overlapped with my own routine almost perfectly, close enough that I began to notice her before I noticed anyone else in the room. She was quiet, efficient, unusually observant in a way that most people are too busy to be at that hour. By the second week she worked there, she had stopped asking me what I wanted. She would simply set the coffee down, black, no sugar, before I had even opened my mouth to order it. I remember thinking it was a small, strange kind of magic, the sort of thing you notice once, feel warmed by, and then let go of quietly, because questioning good things too closely has a way of making them disappear before you understand why they mattered. I didn't know her name yet. I only knew that some mornings, when she set my cup down, she would pause for half a second longer than she needed to, as if she was deciding whether to say something out loud. She never did, not for a long time, not for weeks that turned quietly into months. I had no idea, sitting there in the middle of my ordinary, carefully rebuilt quiet, that she had already decided everything about me a long time before I ever noticed her standing across the counter, waiting. Her name was Ava. I learned it from the small brass tag pinned above her apron pocket, and once I had it, I found myself using it more than was strictly necessary, the way you do with a name you like the sound of the moment you learn it. Our mornings developed their own rhythm without either of us planning it out loud. I would come in, and she would already be moving toward the machine before I'd even taken my coat off. And by the time I sat down at the corner table, the cup would be waiting, steam still curling upward like some small, private greeting meant only for me. We talked, but only in the careful, unhurried way that two strangers talk, when neither one wants to be the reason the other stops coming back. "You work down the street somewhere," she said one morning, more statement than question, sliding into the rhythm of it like she'd been rehearsing the line. "Something like that," I said. "And you?" "Just picking up shifts here for extra money." "Something like that," she echoed, and there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth that told me she knew exactly how little either of us had actually said to each other. I never told her I was an architect. It wasn't a decision I made consciously at first, more an instinct I didn't stop to examine. The same way you don't examine why you keep taking the same route to work even after you've found a faster one. Something in me wanted, for once in my life, to be known without the resume attached to it, without the weight of a title deciding how someone looked at me before they'd even finished their coffee. She never told me she was a designer either. I only knew that she worked mornings at the Amber Cup, and from a single offhand comment she made once about the wrong paint colors ruining an otherwise beautiful room, that she had some kind of trained eye for how spaces were meant to feel. Neither of us pushed past that. There was a strange comfort in the not knowing, an unspoken agreement that whatever we were slowly building didn't need last names or job titles to be real to either of us. What I didn't notice, not for a long time, was how much she already knew about me before that agreement had even formed. She knew I liked the corner table, the one with the clearest view of the old brick sidewalk, before I ever told her I preferred it over any other seat in the room. She knew I took my coffee black before I ever ordered it that way in front of her, on my very first morning with her working the register. Small things, the kind of details a person only picks up if they have been paying very close attention for far longer than a few passing weeks. I told myself it was just good service, the kind that gets a server better tips and a regular's loyalty. I told myself a lot of comfortable things that spring, mostly because the alternative, that someone had been watching the edges of my life closely enough to memorize its habits, felt too large and too strange to hold on to over a cup of coffee at 8 in the morning. There was a night, maybe 6 weeks after we'd started talking in earnest, when I walked back toward the Amber Cup after leaving something in my car, and I saw her through the window after closing time. The chairs were already stacked upside down on every table but one, the lights dimmed to just a single lamp near the register, and she was sitting there with a sketchbook open in front of her, pencil moving fast, and sure across the page in long, confident strokes. I don't know exactly what stopped me from knocking on the glass. Maybe it was the way she looked so completely alone with whatever she was drawing, the particular kind of alone that felt private rather than lonely, the kind you don't interrupt without being invited first. When she glanced up and saw me standing there through the glass, she closed the sketchbook so quickly the pencil rolled off the edge of the table and clattered to the floor. She smiled anyway, a little embarrassed, and waved me off with a small shake of her head that said, as clearly as words could have, "Not tonight." I didn't ask. I have thought about that choice many times since, turned it over more than I probably should, wondering whether things would have gone differently if I had simply knocked and asked her, gently, what she was drawing that mattered enough to hide. But I didn't, and so the sketchbook stayed closed, and whatever it held stayed hers alone for a while longer. I want to say I suspected something deeper in those weeks, some current running underneath the ordinary surface of our mornings. But the truth is simpler and considerably less flattering to me. I was comfortable. After a year of being careful with myself, of rebuilding a life out of small, safe, repeatable habits, I had found something that felt easy without being shallow, warm without asking anything of me I wasn't yet ready to give. I didn't interrogate it. I let it be exactly what it appeared to be, a cup of coffee and a few unhurried minutes, morning after morning, with a woman who seemed to understand me far better than the pace of our careful little conversations should have reasonably allowed. If I had known then what I would learn later, I might have paid closer attention to the pause before she spoke, to the way her eyes sometimes held mine a beat too long, as though she were quietly measuring how much longer she could wait before the truth finally caught up to both of us at once. There were other small mornings that spring worth remembering now, the kind that felt unremarkable at the time and only later revealed how much they had actually carried. There was the morning it rained hard enough that I arrived soaked through my jacket, and she handed me a folded dish towel from behind the counter without being asked, already reaching for it before I'd even finished shaking the water off my sleeves. There was the morning I mentioned, offhand, that I hadn't slept well the night before, and the next day, without comment, my coffee arrived a shade stronger than usual, as though she had quietly adjusted something on my behalf and decided not to make a point of it. I noticed these things the way you notice weather, present and pleasant and easy to take for granted, never once stopping to ask myself what kind of attention it actually took to get so many small details so consistently right. I found myself looking forward to those mornings in a way I hadn't expected to look forward to anything again so soon. Not in some dramatic, sweeping sense, nothing I would have called falling for someone if you'd asked me directly at the time, but in the smaller, steadier sense of simply wanting to be in a particular room at a particular hour with a particular person nearby. I told a friend once, casually, over a beer after work, that the coffee shop had somehow become the best part of most of my days, and he laughed and asked if it was really the coffee that had done it. I remember not having a good answer ready, and laughing it off instead of sitting with the question the way I probably should have. It's strange, looking back, how much clarity a person can avoid simply by refusing to finish a sentence, even inside his own head, even when no one else is listening closely enough to notice the avoidance. I was, in a quiet way, choosing not to ask the one question that might have changed everything sooner. Looking back on it now, I think that spring was the last easy season, the last stretch of mornings where nothing needed explaining and nothing demanded to be understood. I didn't know yet that a woman I had met once, briefly, years before either of us had ever set foot inside the Amber Cup, was standing across the counter from me nearly every single day, choosing, again and again, quietly, and without complaint, to let me not remember her. Melissa came back to Portland 2 months after that first morning. She set the coffee down slowly and asked if I recognized her. She came back for practical reasons, or so she told me. Paperwork on the house we'd bought together years earlier and never quite finished paying off, signatures that needed both our names side by side before the sale could finally close. I met her at a lawyer's office downtown, all cold overhead light and the smell of new carpet, and we signed what needed signing without much conversation passing between us. It should have ended there, cleanly, the way most of our post-marriage business had. It didn't. She saw me a week later, through the front window of the Amber Cup, sitting at my corner table while Ava set a cup down in front of me and lingered a moment longer than any ordinary stranger would have had reason to. I didn't know Melissa had seen us until she called me that evening, her voice carrying a tone I recognized instantly from the worst months of our marriage, sharp underneath something that was clearly trying, and failing, to sound casual. "Who is she?" Melissa asked, not really phrasing it as a question at all. "Someone I know from the coffee shop," I said, which was true, and also, I would later come to understand, not nearly the whole truth of the matter. "That's not nothing, Dean. I know exactly what it looks like when you've decided to like someone. I was married to you for 4 years. I told her it wasn't her business anymore, and she agreed, a little too quickly, in a way that should have told me right then that she wasn't finished with the subject. I didn't think about the conversation again until 2.5 months after that first morning at the Amber Cup, when Melissa called and asked to meet me somewhere private, said she had something I needed to see with my own eyes. I should have asked more questions before I agreed to that meeting. I have thought about that oversight many times since, turned it over the way you turn over a stone looking for what's underneath. She still had contacts scattered through the design world from her years working alongside Derek Voss, the business partner she had eventually left our marriage for, and it was through one of those contacts that she first learned Ava had once worked catering at a charity gala for the Portland Library System, 6 years earlier, back when Ava was still a design student trying to cover tuition one shift at a time. It was through Derek specifically, still tangled in the same professional circles Ava had briefly brushed against as a student, that Melissa got her hands on something else entirely, an old sketchbook of Ava's, borrowed under some half-explained pretense from a project file at a small firm Ava had once freelanced for years earlier. Melissa brought that sketchbook to my office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and I remember the particular quality of the light in there that day, flat and colorless, the kind of light that makes everything in a room look like evidence laid out for a jury. She set the sketchbook down on my desk without asking, opened it to a page near the middle, and turned it around to face me. It was a pencil drawing, quick but careful, of a young man in a rumpled dress shirt holding a rolled set of blueprints under one arm, laughing at something just out of frame. I didn't recognize the drawing at first glance. Then, all at once, I did, in the way memory sometimes returns not gently, but like a door slamming shut behind you. That's you, Melissa said, watching my face carefully. 6 years ago. She's had this drawing the whole time, Dean, and she never once mentioned it. I don't understand, I said, though some quiet part of me was already beginning to. She followed your routine. She asked for that specific shift on purpose, the one that lines up exactly with when you walk in every single morning. You think that's a coincidence? A woman doesn't carry a drawing of a stranger for 6 years and then quietly engineer her way into serving him coffee for tip money. Wake up, Dean. I'm only telling you because someone has to. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because it wasn't noble, and it wasn't even particularly reasonable when I look back at it now. It was fear, plain and old, the specific fear of a man who had already been blindsided once by someone he trusted completely, now dressed up carefully as caution. I told myself I was simply being careful. I told myself I was protecting whatever was left of my ability to trust my own judgment after everything Melissa had already cost me. What I actually did, in practice, was quieter and considerably worse. I started arriving at the Amber Cup a few minutes later than usual, just enough to miss the overlap with Ava's shift entirely. I let 2 of her calls go straight to voicemail that I would ordinarily have answered on the first ring, no hesitation. I didn't explain any of it to her, not one word, because I didn't yet know how to explain it clearly to myself first. I spent those few days doing the thing I imagine most people do when they don't want to face a question directly, which is to keep myself busy enough that the question can't quite catch up. I stayed later at the office than I needed to. I told myself the extra hours were about a client deadline, when really they were about avoiding a particular street at a particular hour of the morning. At night, lying awake longer than usual, I kept circling back to the sketchbook page Melissa had shown me, the version of me laughing with a rolled set of blueprints under my arm, a version of myself I barely remembered being, and I couldn't decide whether it unsettled me because it felt like evidence of something wrong, or because it was proof that a stranger had once seen something in me worth holding on to for 6 long years. I didn't like how much that second thought scared me more than the first one did. She noticed, of course, almost immediately. Anyone paying that much attention to another person notices right away when that person starts quietly pulling away. On the 3rd morning of my small, cowardly retreat, I finally arrived at my usual time again, more out of guilt than any real resolve, and found her waiting with the coffee already made and a question sitting plainly in her eyes that she didn't ask out loud yet. I sat down at the corner table and didn't meet her gaze for almost a full minute, staring instead at the steam rising off the cup. At that same faint hairline crack near the rim, I had somehow never really looked at closely until that exact moment. Dean, she said finally, quiet, careful, choosing each word like it cost her something. Something happened. Tell me what it is. Please don't just disappear on me without a word. I looked up at her then, and for the first time since Melissa had set that sketchbook down on my desk, I let myself really consider that there might be 2 very different stories living quietly inside the exact same set of facts, and that so far, I had only ever been shown one of them. We stayed after closing that night, the chairs already stacked upside down on every table but one, the only light coming from the small lamp by the register that Ava said she liked to leave burning until the last customer, real or imagined, had finally gone home for the evening. I told her everything Melissa had said, the sketchbook, the drawing, the shift schedule that lined up too neatly to be an honest coincidence. I watched her face closely while I said it, half expecting to see panic or denial, or the kind of scrambling, defensive explanation people give when they've been caught doing something they knew all along they shouldn't have done. What I saw instead was something steadier, almost relieved, as if a weight she had been quietly carrying alone for a long time had finally found somewhere safe to set itself down. I'm not going to pretend I don't know exactly what she showed you, Ava said. Because I do know, Dean. And it's true. All of it is true. I just don't think it means what she wants you to believe it means. She told me about the gala 6 years earlier, when she was 24 and still finding her footing as a design student, working catering shifts on weekends to help cover tuition. She told me about dropping a tray of glasses near the edge of the room in front of half the city's donors, about a young architect stepping in without making a scene of it, steadying what she couldn't quite steady herself. And then, of all the small kindnesses a stranger could offer that night, asking to see the sketches poking out of the corner of her bag instead of simply walking away like everyone else had. She told me that the 2 minutes I had spent looking at her drawings, telling her with no particular weight behind it as far as I was concerned, that she had a genuinely good eye, had stayed with her through 3 of the hardest years of her life, the years where she had nearly quit design twice over. "I didn't go looking for you," she said, her voice steady even as her hands weren't quite still. "Not at first. I moved to this neighborhood because the rent was fair and the light was good. I started at the Amber Cup because I needed a second income while I built up my portfolio at night. But then I saw you, that very first week, sitting at that same corner table every single morning, and I recognized you before you'd even ordered. And yes, after that, I asked for the early shift on purpose. I wanted the chance to find out if you were the man I remembered, or if I'd spent 6 years building up a stranger into something he never actually was." "That's not obsession," I said quietly, and I meant it, though I could hear in my own voice that I was still working my way slowly toward believing it fully myself. "I know exactly how it sounds from the outside," she said. "I know how Melissa made it sound to you. But hope isn't the same thing as following someone, Dean. I never once went looking for your address. I never asked anyone a single question about your life outside this coffee shop. I just chose a job, on a street, in a city, that happened to be close to a version of hope I'd been quietly carrying around with me for 6 years. That's genuinely all it ever was, from the very beginning." Then she reached into her bag and set something else on the table between us, a printed email, creased soft from being folded and unfolded more than once. It had come to her, she explained, through a design firm she had freelanced for 2 years earlier, a project file that had somehow never been fully scrubbed of an old email thread between Melissa and Derek, dated well over a year before my marriage had actually ended, full of language that made the timeline Melissa had always given me, of an affair that supposedly began only in its final desperate months. Impossible for me to believe anymore. I sat with that email for a long time, the words blurring and refocusing as I read them twice, then a third time, unable to stop myself. The story I thought I understood about my own marriage quietly rearranged itself in front of me, piece by piece, without asking my permission. And somewhere underneath the anger, underneath the strange, fresh grief of learning your own history, was even less what you'd believe than you'd already reluctantly accepted. There was something close to clarity settling in as well. Melissa had come to me with a story built carefully to make me doubt the one person who had never actually lied to me. Not once, not even by careful omission, once she had finally, quietly decided to speak the whole truth. "I don't need you to remember everything," Ava said, breaking the long silence between us gently. "I never needed that from you, not once. I just needed you to believe, eventually, whenever you were ready, that I never once pretended to be anything I wasn't." "I believe you," I said, "and I'm sorry it took me this long to actually say it out loud to your face." She didn't answer right away. She just reached over and turned my cup a quarter turn on the table, so the small crack near the rim faced away from me, a habit, I would learn much later, she had carried since the very night of the gala, when she'd used that same chipped cup to serve the last of the coffee, because every other clean cup in the building had already been packed away for the night. I hadn't even noticed I'd been drinking from it every single morning for 8 months straight. It had just always quietly been there, the way, in a sense, she had too. I ended things with Melissa completely after that night, and there was no scene about it, no dramatic phone call full of accusations flying back and forth, just a short, clear message telling her I knew about the real timeline now, and that whatever she had hoped to accomplish by bringing that sketchbook into my office, it had done the exact opposite of what she'd intended it to do. The house sale finished through the lawyers not long after, clean and impersonal, the way these things probably should have been handled from the very beginning of our divorce. I never saw her again after that. Not once, not even by accident, which in a city the size of Portland felt like its own small, quiet mercy I hadn't expected to receive. Ava and I didn't rush into anything after that, and I think that was genuinely the right instinct for both of us, even though part of me wanted to make up for lost time all at once. We had already spent months building something slow and careful, without either of us fully understanding what it was we were building. And now that the misunderstandings had finally cleared between us, we found we didn't need to speed up just to make up for time we'd nearly lost to fear and bad information. We started taking walks after her evening shifts ended, along the path that follows the Willamette River, past the old brick warehouses slowly being turned into lofts, past the string of bridge lights coming on one by one as the evenings stretched longer into summer. We talked, finally, about the things we'd never let ourselves say across a coffee counter in the mornings, about my work, the buildings I had designed over the years, the particular quiet satisfaction of watching something you first drew on paper eventually become a place where actual people chose to live their lives. She told me, in turn, about her own designs, the small, modest apartments she had reimagined for clients who couldn't afford much but still wanted their few square feet to feel like somewhere they had genuinely chosen, rather than somewhere they'd merely landed by circumstance. There was no single moment where things shifted from careful to certain. It happened the way most honest things happen, in small increments that only add up to something significant when you look back over enough of them at once. She started leaving her shift a few minutes early some evenings, so we could walk together before the light disappeared completely behind the hills to the west. I started bringing her coffee in return sometimes, an odd reversal that made her laugh the first time, handing her a cup the way she had handed me one so many mornings before, though I always made a point of getting her orders slightly wrong on purpose, just to hear her correct me. We were, both of us, relearning how to let someone else know the small details of an ordinary day without flinching at the intimacy of it, and neither of us was in any hurry to rush that particular kind of trust back into place. It felt, more than anything, like watching two people who had already survived the hard part decide, deliberately, to keep choosing each other anyway, morning after ordinary morning, without needing a single dramatic reason to justify it. 6 months after that long night in the empty cafe, I brought her a gift, a new coffee cup, plain white, no crack running through it, no history attached to it at all, purchased on a whim from a shop near my office because I liked the simple shape of the handle and thought she might like it too, might appreciate something clean and new for once. She turned it over slowly in her hands, studied it for a long, quiet moment under the kitchen light, and then, gently, almost apologetically, set it aside on the counter. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I'm keeping the other one, Dean. I hope that's all right." "It's cracked," I said, smiling a little despite myself. "It's probably been cracked for years now, honestly." "I know," she said, "but it's never actually broken, not once, in 6 whole years of being carried around and used and washed and set down on counters. I think that matters more than it probably looks like it should to anyone else." I didn't argue with her about it. I had learned, by then, that some of the things a person chooses to carry with them aren't really about function at all, and asking her to trade a story like that for a nicer, newer object would have missed the entire point of everything she'd told me that night after closing, sitting across from me with an old sketchbook and an even older kindness she'd never let go of. So the chipped cup stayed exactly where it was, moving quietly between the shelf in her kitchen and, eventually, the small studio she began renting above a print shop just a few blocks from the Amber Cup, where she started taking on design clients of her own in the evenings, sketching out layouts by lamplight in the same careful, confident way she once sketched a stranger holding a rolled set of blueprints under one arm. A full year after the morning she had first set that same cup down in front of me and quietly asked if I recognized her, Ava opened her own small studio, a narrow storefront with good natural light and bare walls just waiting to be filled with her work, the kind of space I recognized instantly as someone's first real chance to prove what they were capable of building when nobody was rushing them anymore, when nobody was watching over their shoulder. I came to the opening carrying the chipped, white cup wrapped carefully in brown paper, feeling a little foolish about the whole gesture right up until I saw the look on her face when she finally unwrapped it in front of everyone. "For the shelf," I said. "So people ask you about it. So you have to tell them the whole story, start to finish, every time." She laughed, a real laugh, and set it carefully on the reclaimed wood shelf behind the front desk, right where anyone walking through the door would see it first, before the framed sketches, before the neatly displayed floor plans, before anything else in the room that told the story of who she had become. It looked small up there, Almost ordinary. A plain white cup with one thin crack running quietly toward the handle. Nobody walking in off the street would ever guess what it had actually carried. Across 6 long years and 1 gala and 8 quiet months of ordinary mornings, all the way to a shelf in a room that was finally, entirely, unmistakably hers. I sit in that studio sometimes now, in the evenings after Ava has locked the front door behind the last client, looking at that cracked cup sitting quietly on its shelf and thinking about how close I actually came to missing all of it, every single piece. 6 years of a story I never even knew I was already a part of, a story that ended, or maybe truly began, in a coffee shop 2 blocks from my own house, because a woman decided, quietly and without ever demanding anything from me, to simply stay long enough for me to finally catch up to what was already true. She didn't fall into my life by some convenient accident. She chose to stay, one ordinary morning at a time, patiently, for longer than I probably deserved, until I was finally paying close enough attention to notice her standing right there in front of me. Have you ever missed someone entirely because you didn't realize just how long they had already been standing quietly beside you, waiting? And if that person ever looked at you one morning and asked, "You don't recognize me, do you?" Would you actually have the courage to sit with that question and remember? Some mornings, walking past that shelf on my way to meet her for lunch, I still catch myself doing the math on it. 6 years, 1 gala, 8 quiet months of coffee I never questioned closely enough, and I think about how easily any one piece of it could have gone differently. I try not to take it for granted now, the particular luck of having been given a second chance to notice something that had been standing patiently in front of me the entire time. If this story meant something to you tonight, take a moment to leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me honestly in the comments below, do you believe in the kind of coincidence that was never really a coincidence at all, not even for one single day?